We'll use all of them throughout the lesson. So before we get to the story of Purim, I'd like to speak about, let's step back for that. One request, no questions. I wasn't there. I don't know why they did this instead of that. I can't answer that. Please do not ask me. I'm trying to get as much information in as possible in a limited amount of time. I did cut it down from about 3 hours to try and fit it into 45 minutes. So I appreciate if questions can be written down, and I'll be available afterward for any clarifications. So before we go into the story of Purim, we're going to speak a little bit about the Yidden before they got to Purim. Yidden came into Eretz Yisrael, and for 400 years they had a Mishkan. About 400 years they had a Mishkan. And then came David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech, and they built the Beis Hamikdash. When the Yidden had the Beis Hamikdash, it was an extremely happy time for the Yidden, and they reached the culmination, they reached the goal, so to speak, of getting to Eretz Yisrael. They finally had a house for Hashem, and it was a really big deal for them. And over time, of course, the grandeur and the excitement over the Beis Hamikdash kind of died down a little bit. Now we know something about Jewish history, that when the Yidden were strong in their faith to Hashem and keeping Torah mitzvahs, things went well, and when things were kind of weakened is when things went south for them. And so we're going to see that a lot, and throughout the story here, we saw it when after Shlomo HaMelech passed away, and the next generations with the kings there was a lot of strife between the Yidden when Yidden were not very strong in the Yiddishkeit. Another preface to the whole story of Purim, I just want to point out, is that the story of Purim is very interesting. It plays out very, very well. In other words, all throughout the beginning of the story, things were laid in place for the end of the story, and as we go through it, you're going to see that. Now, in the year 3205, it's about 300 years or 270-something years into the time of the Beis Hamikdash, along comes an Assyrian king by the name of Sancherev, and he takes and he has a mission to take over the world, to conquer the whole world. And what he does, his way of going about it, of making it work, is by taking people out of their hometown, and he knows that once they're not in their hometown, he doesn't have to leave a governor there or an army there, because there's not going to be a revolution there. If they're not in their hometown, if they're in some random place, they're going to have a harder time uniting and revolting. And so he takes the 10 tribes of the Yidden. The Yidden had split up previously. There was, as I was saying before, about keeping Torah mitzvahs, there was a major rift between the Yidden, and the Yidden basically broke into the north and south of Eretz Yisrael. The north had the 10 Shvatim, the south had Yehuda, and so he takes the 10 Shvatim and he disperses them elsewhere. And now the Yidden are very compromised, a much smaller nation, but they still had the Beis Hamikdash, and that was the end of Sancherev, or the relevant stuff with Sancherev. However, his reign or his empire lasted for about another 100 years or so. Along comes a king by the name of Nevuchadnezzar, and he defeats the Assyrian king, the descendants of Sancherev, and he becomes the new emperor of the world. He's sent to the throne in Babylon, and if you look on your map, you can understand where is Babylon. Let's take out the map for a second, and about smack in the middle, you'll see there's Babylon. That is in the area of where Iraq is today, and he becomes king over there. The later kings of Achashveirosh and Daryavesh and Curated, they take place in Persia and Media, which you'll see is more towards the east of the map. But it didn't really matter. This is where his capital was. This is where their capital was. He was still the emperor of everything. So in the year 3315, Nevuchadnezzar becomes king, and the reason the years are very important over here is because the Yidden had a calculation that we know about, the 70-year calculation, and the next few years are very important towards this calculation. So you need to stop it. Okay, let me put you down. Sit over here. Okay, so in the year 3315, Yirmiyahu implores the Yidden to do tshuva. The Yidden, when they were in Eretz Yisrael after all this time, they had a lot of Nevi'im, and the Nevi'im were kind of their leaders. It was the bright spot within Yiddishkeit, and most of the time what the Nevi'im were doing was begging the Yidden to do tshuva and to continue in the ways of Hashem. And so Yirmiyahu is begging the Yidden to do tshuva, and in that same year, the Yidden got a new king by the name of Yehoyakim. Now Yehoyakim is more secularized, and he was not of the opinion of the whole tshuva thing. He was more on Yidden becoming more prosperous. In the year 3319, Nevuchadnezzar assumes the throne of Babylon. He becomes the king. And, I said before 3315. 3319, it's an important year. Nevuchadnezzar becomes the king of Babylon. And one of the things he does is he comes into Eretz Yisrael and he conquers Yerushalayim. Yehoiakim wants to fight, and Yirmiyahu tells him not to fight, and he tries fighting nonetheless. And when Nebuchadnezzar takes over, he exiles Yehoiakim. 2 years later, in 3321, these years are the years of our years, of the Jewish years. We're not going with the Gregorian calendar. Okay, year 3321. But the BC, whatever. So the year 3321. Yehoiakim comes back from his exile, and Yirmiyahu says a prophecy about the Beis Hamikdash. He says basically the Megillas Eicha. Even though Beis Hamikdash wasn't destroyed yet, he says everything that's going to happen. And Yehoiakim, the king, doesn't like this. He says, you're going to discourage the people, and they're going to give up. And I don't want them to give up. I want them to fight for their freedom of the Babylonians. And so he burns the scrolls of Eicha and he imprisons Yirmiyahu. 2 years later, there's another revolt trying to get rid of the Babylonians, and Yehoiakim is killed in battle, and his son Yechaniah becomes king. That's the year 3323, not important. The next important event happens in 3327, which is the first exile of the Yidden to Babylon, excuse me. We have Nebuchadnezzar is done with the Yidden, is done with these revolts. Doesn't want these revolts to happen anymore, and he comes up with an idea. He says, instead of leaving my governors there and constantly having to come back and fighting with these people, I'll take away all their movers and shakers. I'll take away the cream of their crop, and if they're left without a flock without a leader, then they're not going to bother me anymore. So he takes out the Sanhedrin. He takes out a bunch of the Nevi'im. He takes out all the smart business people. All the leaders are taken, 10,000 people in total, and they're taken to Babylon to live there. And like this, he hopes that he's not going to have a problem anymore dealing with the Yidden. And instead, he puts up a new king now because he took their king as well. And so he puts up a new king by the name of Tzidkiyahu. Tzidkiyahu was not the sharpest tool in the shed. His advisors were not the sharpest people, and now they're living in Eretz Yisrael. This happened in the year 3327. 4 years later, in the year 3331, again a very important year, is when Yirmiyahu predicts that there's going to be the fall of Babel. This empire that's ruling the Yidden are going to fall. And he also has a promise that Hashem told him that within 70 years, the Beis Hamikdash will be destroyed and the Yidden are going to go back to their glory. Now, that 70-year prophecy is a very important part of the whole story over here, because that's when all the other kings started making different calculations on, which we're going to get to later. This happened in the year 3331. 6 years later, the Yidden try revolt again against Yirmiyahu's opinion, against Yirmiyahu's advice. Yirmiyahu tells Tzidkiyahu not to do a revolt. He tells him that if you're going to do this revolt, the Yidden are going to get killed. Don't do it. Tzidkiyahu says, well, I want to do it anyway. I don't want you to tell all the Yidden about this. I don't want you to discourage my armies. Therefore, he puts him in jail. In 3336, they start this big revolt, and Nebuchadnezzar, what? Yeah, he had a Navi Sheker that told him the opposite, that you're going to win, and so he puts Yirmiyahu into jail, and that's when the siege on Yerushalayim began. The siege on Yerushalayim began in the year 3336, and then in the year 3338, 2 years later, you have Asar B'Teves, you have Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, when the Beis Hamikdash is finally destroyed completely, and the walls of Yerushalayim are breached. For 3 weeks, you had the Babylonian soldiers were in Yerushalayim, literally killing people all over the place. Now, Tzidkiyahu made himself an escape route. He didn't want to die, and so he built himself an escape route. He built himself a tunnel out of the city towards Yericho. And he's escaping with his family, and the Babylonian soldiers are hungry, they're looking for food, and they go hunting. And they see a deer, and they chase the deer, they chase, and the deer ends up near the end of this tunnel. And when Tzidkiyahu comes out with his family from the end of the tunnel, there's Babylonian soldiers that were right there. They weren't expecting him, they found him. They took him, they killed his family, and that was the end of... What?
They took him down to Babel. They gouged out his eyes. Before they gouged out his eyes, they killed his son in front of him. And they left him alive. Nebuchadnezzar put him into jail. Later, he took him out of jail and treated him royally.
Okay, stand corrected. And then Afterward, they destroy most of the Jews in Israel, in Eretz Israel are killed. Those that are left alive are taken to Babel, to exile, basically. Nebuchadnezzar is not interested in dealing with this anymore. He doesn't want to deal with them anymore. So he says, "Let's just finish off this whole race. Let's get rid of this whole problem." And so, of course, Beis Hamikdash is destroyed, and once everything is the whole army is taken, the whole nation is taken down, the jail is opened up. Yirmiyahu comes out of jail and he sees there's nobody around, and he says it says in Yirmiyahu that he followed the blood in the streets to find where the Yidden went, and he goes after them on the way towards Babel. And again, if you look at the map, you can see where it is. Right where it says Babylon, there's two small lines, there's two rivers. It's the Tigris River and the Euphrates River. And he meets them on the banks of the Euphrates River, and he meets the Yidden there, and he takes the chains that they have over their shoulders. He says, "I'm part of you. I'm not letting you go." And he continues walking together with them, wearing these heavy chains. Over there is where the Kapitel Kavlan Zion in Tehillim al Navris Babel is said over there. They come to the banks of the river, and the soldiers tell them, "Jews, sing for us the holy songs you sing in your Beis Hamikdash." That's what they say. And that's the pinnacle of the worst time that it was for the Yidden. The Yidden were completely decimated. They had nothing left of them. Yirmiyahu wants to go to Babel, and instead he gets a nevuah that tells him, stay back in Eretz Yisrael, because there still are about 8,000 Yidden in Eretz Yisrael that were in hiding, and they need to have a leader there. You have to stay back. So Yirmiyahu goes back. He doesn't go to Babel. What? Gedaliah, I think, Gedaliah was there also, and at some time around then is when the story where he was killed. That happens in the year 33-38. That's the last of these significant years. The Yidden get to Eretz Yisrael, and there's a whole bunch of different stories there. I'm going to try to skip through a lot of it. There's the story with Chanai, Mishael, Azariah, where they're thrown into the Kivshan Ha'esh because they didn't want to bow down to the statue of Nevuchadnezzar. And eventually Nebuchadnezzar dies. He's followed by his son Mordechai, who was a very, very evil individual, a terrible person. And then he has a grandson, his name is Baalshatzar. Baalshatzar is the king now in Babylon, and he is the emperor of most of the world. This happened sometime between. We moved forward now about 40, 50 years. In the year 3389. There's two other kings, the king of Persia and the king of Media. We're going to discuss about them for a few minutes because they're important to the story of Purim. There was a king. His name was Astyages. He was the king of Persia. He had a daughter, and she had an affair with one of the soldiers. And when she got pregnant, the king was very upset at her and put her in prison. When she gave birth, he sent the baby. He told the soldiers, take the baby away, drop him off on the top of the mountain. The baby was raised by dogs, by wolves, by something, and so he assumed the name. The people started calling him the wolf, which in Persian, or that dialect of Persian, was called Kurush, and so they called him Kurush, or Kairesh, or Cyrus. That was King Cyrus. When did he become king? As he grew up, word got out. He grew up amongst the animals, and he eventually, because he lived in the bush, he was very, very skilled at moving around, and he was very agile, and he became a good warrior because of that. He put together a team of bandits, and they would bother people. They would live off their spoils from that. King hears about it, and he hears it's his grandson, and he sends an army to go take them out, to kill them. He's embarrassed that his grandson grew up, and he wants him to be killed. He sends out an army, and the army is taken down by these bandits. And these bandits are obviously very, very strong, very, very skilled, very powerful. And eventually, he sends out more soldiers, and eventually, Kairesh takes this war back to the king, and he defeats the king. He kills the king, kills his grandfather. This happens in Persia. Meanwhile, in Media, which is right nearby, there's a king whose name is Darius, and he's also a very powerful king. And he hears about this, and he's so impressed that he says, let's be allies. Let's make a treaty between each other. And as a show of a gift to make this thing happen, he gives his daughter to the princess to Kairesh to marry. And so Kairesh marries his daughter. He's his son-in-law, and together they rule these two nations of Persia and Media. Eventually, in the year 3389 that we're talking about, they decide, you know what? Let's take the whole world over. Why do we have to have just Persia and Media? Let's go all the way to Babylon and let's take over Babylon. And so they go and they try beginning a war and try conquering Babylon. And they come to the city of Babylon, which is a walled city, and they're having a hard time getting in. And there's a bunch of small battles going back and forth, but they can't break the walls. Finally, it's in the year 3389. It's 70 years from when Nevuchadnezzar assumed the throne of Babylon and exiled Yaakov and came into Yerushalayim. And in that time, one night they say, you know what, we're done. We're not going to win this, and they back off. And the soldiers all retreat. Baalshatzar was the king of Babylon at the time. He sees that the army backed off. He said, finally, peace, I'm happy. He looks it up and he sees that we're 70 years from the Nevuah. The kings at the time were very well aware that the Yidden had a Nevuah of 70 years, and it very much threatened the kings. The kings were all afraid of that. They were all afraid of being taken down and the Yidden going back to build the Beis Hamikdash. And so Baalshatzar sees it's 70 years. Not only did I not lose, I won. They backed off. So he makes a big party. He brings out the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash and makes a massive party. And during this party, they're all sitting and partying. It's a very, party of the Goyim, so to speak. In the way of the Goyim, there's a lot of drinking, there's a lot of promiscuity, and all of a sudden, they're sitting and partying, and they see a hand, a disembodied hand writing on the wall, and it says a few letters in red, in the color of blood, and they recognize it as Hebrew. They don't know what it is. One of the king's advisors at the time was Daniel. Daniel had already helped out Nevuchadnezzar, and he had helped out others. Daniel was one of the people that was exiled in the first exile 70 years earlier, or 60 years earlier, and so they call him in to explain what it says, and he says these words say minei minei kilu parsin. It means counted, measured and divided. And what it's telling you is that all your deeds that you did were counted, and you've been judged against it, and now your kingdom is going to be divided. And Baalshatzar is shocked to hear that, because here he thinks that he just got past dealing with the Yidden and Hashem, and now he sees that he's dealing with the Yidden and Hashem, and he's shocked about it, and he runs outside. There's a medrash that says that one of his soldiers realized, okay, if he's and Daniel finishes the prophecy by saying, tonight you guys are going to fall. And so one of the slaves, or one of the servants, goes outside and says, if we're going to fall, and Daryavish and Koresh are going to come in here, I want to survive. Let me help them out, and I'm going to go kill the king that they're coming to get, and when they come, I'll have it on a silver platter for them. And so he goes outside when Daryavish is on his own outside the palace, and he kills him. Baalshatzar, he kills him, he beheads him, and he brings his head to Daryavish and Koresh. And sure enough, that later that night, Daryavish and Koresh come back. Their retreat was just to replenish and to actually take him over, and so they come back and they conquer the city of Babylon. They break the walls. They come in. When they come into the palace, there's a 12-year-old girl and she's sleeping. That's Vashti. And Daryavish sees that this girl is sleeping, the princess is sleeping, and he takes her back to his palace. He gives it to Koresh. Koresh takes it back to the palace. Koresh had a son whose name was Achashveirosh, and he was the prince at the time who was eventually going to be a successor. And he gives Vashti to Achashveirosh to marry her. Now Vashti at the time was 12 years old, so Achashveirosh did not marry her at the time. He waited a little bit. This is the end of Babel. Babel is completely gone now. The Nevuah of Babel going down came true, right? They saw it come true, and that's why the Goyim at the time were very afraid. No one thought that Babel would be able to fall, and now they saw Babel fall, so they said, "Hey, this Nevuah of 70 years must be true, and eventually, we don't want to be on the Yidden's bad side." And so, in the year 3390, you have the story of Daniel B'Gav Ha'arayos with Daryavish. He put him in jail for a little bit, and he has a story where he was with the lions, and they ended up throwing the other soldiers into, or the other officers, the other king's officers. The point there is that the kings had a lot of Jewish advisors. All the kings had a lot of Jewish advisors. Jews held very high positions, and that was a theme that you had all throughout, and you had it even by Achashveirosh. So year 3390, which was a year later, is the story of Daryavish putting Daniel into the lion's den. In the year 3391, Daryavish dies, and so his partner, so to speak, Koresh, becomes king over the entire developed world at the time, which in the Freshim it says was actually 250 lands, not 127. And a year later he dies, and his son Achashveirosh becomes the king, and he is ruler over 250 lands, and he slowly starts losing a few of them here and there. And we're going to see that as an important part of the whole story of Purim. Achashveirosh was a stable boy, is not according to most Mefarshim. It's not according. The Purim story says it clearly, and Me'am Leis happens to argue with it. So now we're holding by the beginning of the story of Achashveirosh. Now, one thing before that, in the year 3391, It's now 70 years from the year 3321, which is when Yirmiyahu predicted or prophesied the destruction of Beis Hamikdash. And so Koresh says, listen, I appreciate so much what Hashem did for me by making me king of the whole world. I want to give back. I want to give back to the Yidden. He tells the Yidden, all the Yidden that want to, you're welcome to go back to Eretz Yisrael. And he sends with Zerubbabel. He's going to help you rebuild the Beis Hamikdash and restore the Jews their former glory. And most of the Jews are happy. They're living in Persia. They've been living there for 70 years. They're comfortable. They don't need a change. A lot of them are comfortable. And only 42,000 Yidden go back to Eretz Yisrael. Come back to Eretz Yisrael for only 42,000.
How many Yidden were there about?
I have no idea. I'm assuming hundreds of thousands. I don't know. If only 42,000 went back, it had to be in the hundreds of thousands. I don't think they reached 1 million people. I don't know. The Yidden were also always persecuted, and so their numbers kept up, as much as they grew, they kept on coming down.
It's mashma. There's a calculation, and they haven't discussed it, how many Yidden were killed by the Purim.
First Purim.
By the first Purim.
Second
I don't
Purim,
know. The Gemara from the Gemara
It comes out millions.
Millions, but it comes out to 2 million.
So 2 million were killed, and how many were left, right?
The second Purim was worse. The second Purim was worse.
Okay, so
We don't really care.
let's go. So the Yidden are starting to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash, and there's a nation there that we know later by Hanukkah also made the Yidden a lot of problems, called the Samaritans. And the Samaritans are in Eretz Yisrael, and they don't want the Yidden to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. They're living good there without the Yidden. They don't want the Yidden there. And so together with Shimshei, who is a son of Haman, they put together a letter, and they sent a letter back to Koresh saying that you sent the Jews here, and now they're planning a revolt against you. Obviously, it wasn't true, but they said that. And so Koresh stops the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. Even though he restarted, he stopped it. So the Beis Hamikdash wasn't on its way to being rebuilt yet. Now we come to the story of Purim. So, a second. So Achashveirosh has these lands, these 250 nations, and the year 3392 is when he becomes king. And in the first year, there's a lot of countries decide to secede from him. They don't want him to be their leader. And one of them is a province in India, a big province in India, that they decide that they're not interested in him. And so he sends an army to go and take down that revolution. Who is that army? There's 2 ministers that are leading that army. One of them is a man by the name of Haman. Another one is a man by the name of Mordechai. And they go out there with their 2 separate armies to come to this one place. And they attack the army. They attack the city from 2 sides. So they went completely as 2 separate armies. And the provisions they took along provisions for 3 years worth, just in case it would take that long. And Haman, being a chazir that he finished all the provisions they had within the first year. And now they defeat together from both sides. They defeat the revolution, and they are heading back to Persia, back to Shushan. And on their way, they meet up the 2 armies, and Haman says, "We're hungry. We have no food. Give us food." And he says, "No." Mordechai says, "No. Why do I owe you anything? I don't owe you anything. This is for my soldiers. They have to have food until we get back." And they get the whole conversation. He says, "Fine. You know what? You want me to give it to you? I'll give it to you. However, making one deal with you. You have to be my slave one day a week going forward." And Haman sees he has no choice. He says, "Okay, fine, I'll be your slave." They write up a contract. Where do they write this contract up? So they wrote it. In the armor that they wore a metal armor that covered their whole body. So there was a breastplate, there were arm plates, there were leg plates, and so on the piece that went from below the knee till the foot, it's called a jambo. Mordechai figured, okay, this is the least necessary piece of armor that I'm wearing. Inside it was a piece of leather to make it comfortable on the leg. It shouldn't hurt the leg if it's metal against the foot. And so there's a piece of leather. And so they write the contract on that and signed with Haman's blood. And it says he's going to be his slave. And Mordechai holds on to that. Most people don't know about it, but the word does get out. Achashveirosh eventually does hear about that. We're going to see later on in the story where Achashveirosh actually throws that back into Haman's face. But that's the story there. Okay, 2 years later, now it's the 3rd year of his reign. It's the year 3395. If you count a little bit of the year 3395, and you count a little bit of the year 3327, which is when the Yidden were initially exiled, then you have a little bit of those 2 years. You have 68 years in the middle. That would be 70 years. And so Achashveirosh makes a cheshbon. It's been 70 years. I don't have to worry about this decree or about this prophecy that Hashem is going to give the Yidden what's called. He's going to rebuild the Beis Hamikdash. It's done. I have nothing to worry about. However, there is one thing that bothers him. He has his astrologers, and one of them tells him, I see a future reading that eventually a Jew is going to wear your crown. And this incites a major hatred within Achashveirosh towards the Yidden. because he doesn't want to lose his throne to an outsider, to a yid, a commoner. He wants the throne should go to his family. He wants to keep it in his family. And so he grows a burning anger and a burning hatred towards the Jews. Jews don't know why, but he starts being extremely, extremely difficult on the Yidden. He makes this big party for 180 days. During this party, he had nobles from all 127 countries that he ruled over. If you look back at this map, so you see it goes from India until about Ethiopia. That was the coverage of the Persian Empire under Achashveirosh, and he had his 127 nations were only within that. Anything outside of there, he didn't rule over. And so he wanted to bring everybody close to him and show them how rich he is and how wealthy he is and how good of a king he is, so that way there won't be any revolutions against him. He wants to have a peaceful reign. And so he makes this massive party. People come in with their delegates from different countries, and they come in for a week long at a time, right? 127 different countries had to come. They came in with big parties, big families, and so the party went on for 6 months, but it wasn't one person there for 6 months. It was a constant turnover. Now we're going to talk about this party a little bit and a little bit about the palace. So if you look at the picture on the map, that is a view of one part of the palace. The palace compound was 32 acres. It had 3 mini mountains within it. There were bridges going from one to the other. And this picture is actually a picture taken recently of one end of the mountain, of the end where the actual big palace was. It was 3 mountains. 2 of the mountains were used for residences, and one of the mountains was used for entertaining and for official business. The big palace that we're talking about was not where the king slept or his living quarters was. It was the entertainment area. This palace was really, really big. It was tremendous. The entertainment room was the entrance room. The entrance room was the size of 2 football fields. It was huge. The ceilings were 65 feet high. To understand that the base, there was 36 pillars that held up the roof. The base of these pillars, which you can still see today, I actually Googled it last week, you can see pictures of the base of the pillars that were made of a stone or marble is taller than a man. It's about 8 feet high. And the actual, what? It's in. Okay, so sorry, I meant to speak about this. If you look smack in the middle of the picture, there's a place that says Susa. Susa is a city in Iran today, with all these excavated remains of the palaces of Achashveirosh and Dayavesh. There was 2 cities where the palaces were. There was Susa, and if you look to the right of it, there's Persepolis. Persepolis was the summer palaces. Susa was the winter palaces, and Susa is where Achashveirosh made his capital. The other kings, or a lot of other kings, used Persepolis as their capital, but Achashveirosh was in Susa or Shushan. In Persian today, it's called Shush, and these things are all still there. So all the smiling Eli, I'm sorry, it's there. The bases were 8 feet high. The ceiling was supposedly 65 feet high, and it was a massive room. And the idea was that Achashveirosh wanted to show off his riches. And we know afterward different stories about the riches, about how rich Achashveirosh was. When Alexander the Great went and plundered, when he went to conquer the world, he came to the palace here and he took a lot, and the Greeks recorded everything that was taken. And they said that they had 20,000 donkeys carrying back the treasures that they had taken from the palace of Shushan. And it has all these other crazy numbers. There was 5 tons of gold cups, and just the opulence was tremendous. One of the things we mentioned in the Megillah is the word argaman. We mentioned the word argaman. Argaman is purple wool. What was the big deal about the purple wool? So the Mordechai says that was the sign of royalty, because for some reason the scientists then couldn't figure out how to make purple dye. And so the only way to get it was a certain blood of a certain animal. That was the only way to do it. And so it showed just the rarity of it, and it showed how special it was. And so they had these fancy couches that were made of gold and silver, and they were covered with linens, and then these purple wools covering it. And there was another part that we all know of, is the wine, that everyone was given these massive cups of wine to drink, and they sourced wine from everyone's specific regions, so that way everyone should be comfortable and everyone should enjoy. The main reason was Achashveirosh wanted to show the world that he deserves, so to speak, that they should be subordinates to him. After he finished this 180-day party and everybody leaves, he makes a 7-day party. What was the 7-day party? The 7-day party, the Midrashim tell us, is a Sheva Brachas. Vashti was brought to him when she was 12 years old. Now in the year 3395, it's already 6 years later, now she's 18, now he marries her. And he makes a big party. And at this party, he had two goals. Goal number 1 was to celebrate his marriage to his new wife. And goal number 2 was that he wanted the Yidden to sin. It was very important to him that the Yidden would sin, because as much as he knew that the 70 years were over, according to himself, the issue was that he was still in the back of his mind. He was worried. His astrologers told him that a Yid was going to succeed him, and he didn't like that, and so he wanted to get the Yidden to sin. And so he makes this big party, and he was very careful with it. He told his soldiers, don't force the Yidden to drink. If you force them to drink the tray for wine, then they didn't really sin. They were forced into it. It's not their fault. Do it in a way where they're going to be enticed. Show them the opulence. Show them the good life, but don't force them. And so they have this party for 7 days, and the Megillah tells the 7th day, the Medrash tells us that it was Shabbos, so the Yidden were not there. Yidden were not at this party, and the Goyim start having a conversation between each other. Most of the people there are drunk and have a conversation. Who has the most beautiful women? And so the Median nobles, the Persians and the Medes were there, the nobles were there. The Median nobles said that the Medes are the prettiest women. And the Persians say that the Persians are the prettiest women. And Achashveirosh comes and says, 1 second, hold up. My wife Vashti is from Babylon. She's not a Persian, not a Mede. And she's the prettiest. The Gemara tells us that at the time, the 4 prettiest people to ever live, one of them was Vashti. The other ones were, maybe Sarah and Rachav and Abigail. And then the 4th one, some people in the Gemara says that there was Esther, and some people say it couldn't be Esther. So the Gemara says that it was Vashti. So either way, Vashti was very pretty. And so he says the prettiest women are from Babylon. So they say, prove it. He says, okay, fine, I'll call her to come. They say, one second. Anyone can get dressed up and look pretty. You take an ugly person, you put on the queen's clothing, she'll look pretty. He says, fine, no problem, I'll call her to come with only her crown on. Nothing else. No other clothing. So he calls her to come, and she says, "No, I'm not coming like that. I'm royal blood. I'm a lady. I don't come like that. I'm not going to go naked in front of everybody." Because at the time, it was a common thing that at parties their women would show off. And so she said, "I'm not like them. I'm not a commoner. I'm royal, and I'm not going to do that." And so Achashveirosh sends back a message that you're disobeying the king. It's going to cost you. And she says, "Well, I'm royal, and just like you think that you're the king, I'm the queen, and I'm not coming." And she gets a second warning from the king, and she says, fine, okay, this time she's afraid, and so she says, okay, she's going to go. And as she's ready to go out, she looks at herself in the mirror, and she sees that she grew tons of acne and eczema all over her body, and the Medrash says that she grew a polyp on her back, which is, she grew a small bump on the back. It wasn't a full-length tail, as we are told in school, but... What? Okay, I'm sure there's a Medrash that says everything, right? But the Medrash says there's a small bump, and anyway, she says, I'm not coming. Achashveirosh is upset about that, but he's okay. It is what it is. So he asks he has these Yiddish advisors that were around, and he asks them, "What should I do?" He very highly valued the opinions of the Jewish people. He saw they were smart business people. He saw that they were smart and good advice to all other kings. He asks them, "What should I do?" And they didn't tell him. Listen, they talk between each other. They say, "Listen, if we say kill her, he's going to kill us afterward, and if we don't say kill her, he's going to blame us." So they tell him that since they don't have the Beis Hamikdash, and since the Beis Hamikdash has been destroyed, the Nevuah has left Yidden, and maybe they're not the right advisors for him. So he had another group of 7 advisors, and the Megillah counts it off. And Memuchan is the last one. And Medrash tells us the reason why Memuchan is the last one, he was the lowest of all. The first 6 were smart. They said, listen, we're not getting involved over here. We're going to tell the king to kill her. Then we're going to get killed for it. We don't tell him to kill her, we're going to be punished. So they just abstain from it. Haman, Memuchan, comes and he says, hey, I have a brilliant idea. I have a beautiful daughter. I want her to become the queen. Let me get Vashti taken out, and then I'll send my daughter in. And so he starts pushing the king, and he tells the king, you got to do it. You got to kill her. And the king says, I don't want to kill her. She's my queen. I love her. She's royal. She doesn't have to follow by the rules of everybody else. And he says, what do you mean she's royal? She just disobeyed you, and if you're not going to take care of, if you're not going to nip it in the bud now, they're going to start a women's rights movement. They're never going to listen to us. Not here, not in Persia, not in Babylon, not anywhere, not anywhere of your whole nation. And so he says, okay, fine, we're going to have to kill her. Achashveirosh tries pushing it off, but he's very, very tipsy, and eventually he sets down the decree, okay, go ahead and kill her, and send out the message. He wakes up the next morning, and he's like, what happened here? Where's my wife? And they tell him, you killed her. And he says, you're my advisors, you were supposed to stop me from that, I was drunk. and they say, we tried to, we did, we didn't, and they explain to Achashveirosh exactly what happened, the whole back and forth, and how it was how Haman was the one that pushed it. And Achashveirosh immediately has those first 6 advisors put to death. He says, you're bad for the country and you're bad for the empire, and he has them put to death. Haman, he says, I want him to suffer. And so he says, instead of killing him right away, I'm going to raise him up. I'm going to make him somebody special. I'll make him into somebody. And then when he's all proud of himself, then I'm going to come and I'm going to take him down. And so he promotes Haman instead of killing him. Now, after killing Vashti, Achashveirosh fell into a depression. For a year, there was nobody to talk to. And his 7 advisors that were there, they were gone. He had to replace them. He replaced them with young advisors. And the young advisors realized that the king is depressed. And they realized that if we don't do something about it, he's going to eventually just die. And if he dies, there's going to be a new king. We're going to lose our position. We have to get the king back to being happy. We have to bring him to a better place. So they come up with an idea. They tell the king, right? And they the king should go ahead and find a girl. And they gave a few different conditions. Condition number 1, she has to be pretty, pleasing to the eye. Condition number 2, she has to be a good personality that the king is going to like. Condition number 3 is that she can't come from a royal place. Because this issue that the king had with Vashti was because she was a royal. So bring in a commoner, not a royal, and then you're not going to have the issue that she's going to say, who do you think you are? I'm the queen. You're not the queen, you're a nobody. The king made you the queen. Right? And together with that, the king said also that she shouldn't go with her parents' permission. It should be by force. The governors of the different lands should send a few girls from each land, take them by force. And the last thing was that when they come to see the king, they shouldn't be wearing their own clothing. They should be wearing clothing provided by the king. That way, they will try to make it kind of uniform, so the king will not get distracted by their extra beauty, by their outside beauty. It'll be more about who they are. And so they bring the king different women. And it says that was showing that the king learned his lesson about promiscuity. He ended up killing Vashti because he wanted her to come in a very improper way. And so the king learned his lesson, and his meeting the women was always done at night in an obscure manner. And he goes through, he meets all these different women. Gemara tells us that he met 1,100 or so women. And eventually he meets Esther. Now we know like this, the women were brought from all over, and they had to go through a year of quarantine, or 6 months of quarantine and then 6 months of preparation. And the women were given helpers, that they should be able to be in their top condition when they meet the king. Now Esther was given 7 different maidens to help her out. The other women were given less, but Esther was given more because everyone immediately liked Esther upon meeting her. Her personality was such that people were completely blown away by her, and they liked her immediately. Haggai liked her immediately. Everybody liked her. Haggai was the person in charge of the king's harem. Now he was actually not. It says that he was Shris Hamelech. What Shris means? That he was Saris. He was castrated. That way he wouldn't mess with the women. Now he was in charge of the king's harem. What did it mean to have a harem? A harem was where the girls would come there, and once they met the king, they were too good for anybody else. They weren't allowed to be with anybody else. And so a lot of girls didn't want to go just because they knew this was the end of a relationship for them. Yes, they had a chance to be with the king, but if they didn't, then they were never going to be able to be with anybody else. And so a lot of girls didn't want to go. And so they had to come there, they had to be given a lot of gifts, and they had to be given all these different things to entice them to go to the king. When it came to Esther, Esther said, I don't need any gifts, I don't need anything, I don't want anything. In fact, she didn't want to go with any extra jewelry, no extra perfume or anything like that. And Hagar convinces her, please take the bare minimum at least. And so she goes with the bare minimum, and she comes to the king, and she meets the king, and eventually the king says that he wants to make her a queen. Now, interesting fact on this is that most of the women were young women, right? They had to be a basula. That was one of the conditions. And Esther, while she was a basula, she was also 70 years old. So what? She wasn't? She says she wasn't a basula, but she was 70 years old, but her inner beauty shined so strong, that's what won the king over. And so she becomes the queen, and they make a big party. Now, 2 things they did at the party. Number 1 is that the king, it says right? They went and they did a second round of collecting girls. The idea of this was to make sure to basically let Esther know you're replaceable, and therefore be the best queen you can be. And at this big party, it says the king gave hanach al dinos. He lowered their taxes as a thank you to all the nations for sending people, for sending their women. Achashveirosh was a king that, for the most part, was very tolerant of everybody keeping their own religions, very tolerant of everyone keeping their own ways of life, and he was overall a very nice king, except for to the Yidden. The Yidden he was very difficult with, but he was very difficult with them for a reason, that he was afraid of them. Now we said before, just one mention that the Medrash tells us that Haman wanted his daughter to go be queen. What happened to her? Medrash tells us that Hashem made a miracle, and when she was ready to go to the king on her way in, she had a severe stomachache, and she defecated on herself. And so she came to the king's palace, smelling disgusting, and the guards wouldn't even let her go through. And this was a big offense to Haman. It bothered Haman a lot, and it is what it is. It didn't end up happening. And this bit at Haman all the time. It bothered him so much that he grew an intense hatred towards Esther because of this. Meanwhile, the king was very angry at Haman for giving the advice of killing Vashti. But once he met Esther, the Medrash tells us that he completely did a complete change. Now he was happy with Haman. Now he was happy because he felt that Esther was so much of an improvement on Vashti that he completely forgot about his misery and depression on Vashti, and things were going very nice in the country. Meanwhile, Haman was this bad guy, and he was very very conniving, very scheming. He thought up a plot. He said, "Listen, if my daughter's not going to be queen, I'm going to become emperor." And so he plans with big son Sancherev to kill the king, but he doesn't do it directly because he doesn't want his name involved. So he goes to a Greek general, and he partners up with him, and he has the Greek general contact big son Sancherev and tell them to plan this assassination of the king. And he feels that being in his high position, he will eventually become the next king. And of course, Mordechai hears the story. He hears their plan, and he tells Esther. And he tells Esther, "Do me a favor. Don't tell the king that it was me. You take the credit." And so Esther goes back, and she tells Achashveirosh that Mordechai was the one that told her about it. And she also tells Achashveirosh, "Don't give him a reward right now, because he asked me not to tell you. I'm being honest with you. You're my king. You're my husband. You're my king. Therefore, I'm being honest with you. But don't give him a reward now. Better write it down in your record books. Take care of him at a later date. It shouldn't be so direct." So instead of giving Mordechai a reward, it's just written down the Sefer Devrei Yamim. Now the king, we said, was so happy with Haman for the good that he did for him, and so he raises him up, makes him this. He promotes him, makes him second to king, right? Haman is second to king, and one of the things that the king says about him is that you are going to people have to bow down to you, and you're going to rule over everything. Anything you want to do in my country, you don't need my approval for. You can go ahead and do it. And so Haman makes Achashveirosh make a decree. He makes this decree that nobody's allowed to come to the king without a personal invitation from the king. If you don't have a personal invitation, then you can't come to the king. And Esther thinks that it includes her as well, and so she's not going to the king now for the next X time because she didn't get called by the king. And so later when we see that Esther tells Mordechai, "I can't go because I wasn't called for 30 days," this was a decree made by Haman. Haman wanted to have access to the king over everybody else, including the queen. He wanted to be the most powerful person, and so he made this decree. Back to Haman, he walks outside and he sees Mordechai, everyone's bowing down to him, Mordechai doesn't bow down to him, and the Narei HaMelech, the servants of the king, ask Mordechai, "Why aren't you bowing down?" And Mordechai says, "I can't, I'm Jewish, I'm a Yid, I can't bow down." And he says, "What do you mean you're Yid, you can't bow down? Your grandfather, Yaakov Avinu, he bowed down to Esav. Esav is the son of Haman's the son of Esav, why can't you bow down to him?" And he tells him, and he answers to them that I am from Shevet Binyamin. Binyamin wasn't there when Yaakov Avinu bowed down to Esav, only 11 children there, Binyamin wasn't born yet, and therefore my grandfather didn't bow down, and so therefore I can't bow down over here. And they tell Haman, and Haman obviously is very, very upset about it. He has a major ego, and his major ego is what causes a big part of his downfall. He says, "I want to kill this guy," and he's the second in command. He can do whatever he wants to in such a country. Even though Mordechai was a minister of the king, and even though Mordechai was sitting by the king's gate always, he was just another person to Haman, and Haman could have killed him. But Haman said, it's below my dignity to go ahead and kill one guy. Let me take out their whole nation. And so he goes to the king. So he goes to make his raffle, decide on a date, right? The Megillah tells us it was Chodesh Nisan, which is the first month of the year, and he makes his raffle. Now his raffle looked like, tells us that the raffle looked like this. He had two things. He had a set of die, and on the die were the letters Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Daled, Hey, Vav, and they were set together like it was a cube. So just like a regular dice today, it had the same thing. And the same way a dice today has the ones versus the six, all opposite sides of the dice equal 7, the 1 against the 6, the 2 against the 5, and the 3 against the 4. So too on this, it was the Aleph against the Vav, and the Beis against the Hey, and the Gimel against the Dalet. And he throws it out, 3 dice, and it comes to the numbers 1, 3, 3, or Aleph Gimel Gimel, which is Agag, which is his ancestry. And if you look at the other sides, what's the opposite of Aleph Gimel Gimel? It's going to be Vav, Dalet, and Dalet. Or if you unscramble it, it's David. And he takes this as a sign Milamala that Agag is going to be on top of David, and that it's a good idea for him to go and kill the Yidden. So he puts together, what date am I going to do it? And he didn't want to just do a random raffle where it was arbitrary. He wanted a sign Milamala that it was a good idea for him to do it. So he put down one box with 12 months. He went with the Hebrew months of the 12 months, and the second box had 354 days of the year in it. So just numbers, 1 through 354. And he said, I'll pick out a month, and I'll pick out a day. And if this day of the year corresponds to the month, it's a proof from Lamaila that I should go ahead with this plan. So he picks out the month, it's Adar. He picks out the number 337, which corresponds to Yud Gimel Adar. And he says, okay, look, this is a sign from Lamaila, and he goes to Achashveirosh with his grand plan. Now he comes to Achashveirosh with his plan that he wants to go ahead and kill all the Yidden. And he doesn't want to tell Achashveirosh straight up, I want to kill a Yidden. He says, there's this nation, they're separated, there's not many of them, they don't unite, they don't follow the king's ways. And basically what he's telling the king is that they're a nuisance. They're a nuisance. And if you're afraid of losing taxes because of them, I'm going to give to you. I'll give you 10,000 loaves of silver. So if you use Google and you Google how much is a loaf of silver, it says that it's 30 kilograms, which is 66 pounds. 16 ounces in a pound, it comes out to roughly about 1,000 ounces in one loaf. Okay, at the rate of $26, which is today's exchange rate for silver, it'll come out to about 27,000 and change per loaf. 10,000 loaves comes out to close to $300 million. And he offered this to Achashveirosh, I'm going to give you $300 million to take out these people. I'll cover their taxes. You're not going to be losing anything by them. And Achashveirosh says, I'm such a wealthy king, I don't need your money, keep your money, it's fine. I'm going to forego the $300 million you want to give me, do what you want to do with them. And so he gives him a ring, and he tells him, here's my ring, you can put any decree you want, and I just sold you this whole nation. Now the reason he never told him it was the Yidden was, he wanted Achashveirosh was again a strong believer, and he was afraid of the Yidden, of fighting the Yidden. Much as he hated them, he was afraid of fighting them. And so he wanted to leave himself plausible deniability. He said, listen, I don't know who this nation is. I don't know who he's talking about. There's a nation. No problem, do it to your nation. I'm king. I don't have time to deal with this. And so he doesn't tell him who the nation is, but it's obviously understood that it's the Yidden. And he sets this up. So Haman writes up the decree. And the decree is basically that he sends two separate decrees. One decree says, people of the Persian Empire, be ready for the 13th of Adar. There's going to be a big thing, just get ready. Then he sends out a separate decree going just to the governors of all the lands, and it says in there that on this day you get your people together and you kill the Jewish people, but you don't just kill them. There were 2 very specific rules in there. Number 1, you kill the children in front of their parents, and number 2 is the people should not be buried. He was a real Russia. He was a terrible, terrible person, an evil person, and he wanted it to hurt as much as possible. And so he did those 2 things. The people can't be buried; they have to be left out on the street to rot. And he sends this out. He sends out his runners. He sends them out as fast as they can. Measure tells us that they ran at top speed. They covered in 1 day what would normally cover in 10 days, and they get to all the furthest reaches of the land, and they send out this decree. He sends out the decree, and in Shushan, he doesn't hold back. He tells everybody what the plan is. In Shushan, everybody knows what the plan is, and he also decrees that all roads out of Shushan are blocked. No one's allowed to leave Shushan for the next year. That way, they can't get the word out to the regular people around the world, because they don't want the Yidden that were outside of Shushan to be able to unite and defend themselves. So if it's a surprise, they won't know about it, and then last minute, the locals there will come around and kill the Yidden. The Medrash tells us that when Achashveirosh took off that one ring, taking off his ring was greater than all the Nevi'im and Nevi'as together, because all the Nevi'im and Nevi'as, their main goal always was to get the Yidden to do tshuva. And they couldn't. They were always failing on it. And this Achashveirosh taking off his ring and giving it to Haman, that caused the Yidden to do tshuva and come back to each other, come back to Hashem, as we're going to see a little bit later in the story. That's the end of Perek Gimel. Perek Dalet in the Megillah tells us about Mordechai. He puts on the sackcloth and he goes outside and he meets a few children and he asks them, "What did you learn?" This one says, "I learned Taltira." This one says, "I learned Tutzik Sufar." And Haman sees him talking to the kids. And as the kids walk away from him, Haman sees him and he's smiling. So, what are you smiling about? He says, "Look, the Jewish children have such pride. Even with your terrible decree, they're not afraid." And so Haman takes those children and Haman threatens Mordechai that I'm going to kill the Jewish children of Shushan before everything else, even before the decrees, even before the date that it has to happen on. The Yidden were so afraid at that time. A lot of Yidden gave their children to Goyish neighbors and asked them to hide their children for them because they didn't want their children to be killed. It's like, hey, we're going to be killed, but why should our children die as well? And so they said they tried giving their children over. And the Goyim that were sympathetic towards the Yidden, they said, look, we'd love to help you, but Haman's going to kill us if we take your kids. And so they wouldn't take them. Then we have the story where Hasach went back and forth between Mordechai and Esther, giving messages back and forth. Haman gets wind of these messages going back and forth with somebody named Hasach. Hasach was actually Daniel, and Haman has him killed. And so at the end of the back and forth between Mordechai and Esther, she tells him, get the Yidden to fast for 3 days, and I will go in. One more detail I missed over here. Mordechai tells Esther that don't think that because you're chilling in the castle, in the king's palace, you're going to be fine. Okay? If it's a decree against the Yidden, you're also threatened. As well, the Yidden always end up surviving. We're a nation that was never taken down, and we're not going to be taken down now. But you have the ability to be the catalyst to saving us. And so you go into the king, and she says, I can't go to the king because of the 30 days, that decree from Haman, and it's been 30 days. And so she says, fine, go and fast, right? And then I'll go in. So she's been fasting now for 2 days. She's on the third day. On the third day of the fast, she comes into the king, and she walks straight past the guards. Mordechai tells her, go in with full confidence, and the guards will leave you alone. Because the guards are instructed, before anyone gets to the king, kill him. Right? And they see Esther coming, and they want to kill her, but she's so full of confidence, they're not sure. Should they go for her or not? And so they all step back, and she comes into the king's throne room. She comes into the king's throne room, and is immediately the fear and the moment takes her over, and she starts trembling. And the king sees her, and he's thinking, what are you doing? You're going to get killed. What did you come here for? When he tells her, I'm going to give you ad chatzia malchos, his question was, what could be so important to you that you put your life on the line to come talk to me? And the soldiers are standing on the side. They're already talking about what they're going to divvy up in her possessions because they know she's toast. And the king gets up full of rage and runs over to her. And in the last second, just as he gets to her, she begins to faint. And she walked in with one of her servants, and she starts falling onto the servant. And the king immediately has a little bit of compassion and supports her so she shouldn't fall, and tells her, it's okay. Don't worry, what did you come here for? And I'll give you whatever it is that you want. Ad chatzia malchos. The Medrash tells us that what's ad chatzia malchos? It was referring to the Beis Hamikdash. While the king didn't know, while Achashveirosh did not know that she was Jewish, he did know that she was brought up by Mordechai, and so she knew that he had sympathy. She had sympathy towards Mordechai, and the king was always afraid of her one day coming to him and saying, "Give Mordechai what he wants, let him build the Beis Hamikdash." And the king did not want that happening because to him that was the worst thing that can happen to his empire is the rebuilding of the Beis Hamikdash. And so he says, "Ad chatzia malchos, I'll give you half my nation I'll give you half my kingdom up to the Beis Hamikdash." And she says, "No, all I want is a party with you and Haman." Now, the king is a little flustered by what's going on over here. He says, "Okay, fine, no problem. Let's make a party with you and Haman. Mahar was Haman. Bring Haman right away." The king thought right away, 1 second, why does she want to have a party with me and Haman? What was this big deal over here? What was so important? Why does she want to have a party with me and Haman? Don't let Haman go and scheme anything. And so he brings Haman right away, and they have their party together. And at the party, they're sitting drinking. He asks her again, what do you want? Chatzia malchos. And again, she says, nothing. I don't want anything. I just want you guys to come to our party tomorrow. The Medrash tells us that she was still fasting. It was still the third day. She was still fasting, so she couldn't eat anything. And so she was not even at the party. She was serving. She was serving so as not to show that she's not eating. And so she finally says, I want you guys to come back tomorrow. When the party is over, Haman's elated. The king is freaked out. King is freaked out. Something's wrong over here. Something doesn't make sense to him. He never has a meal together with Haman. Now all of a sudden he's having meals with Haman. The queen is being very, very strange. Are they plotting to kill me? Are they plotting something against me? Are they plotting to overthrow me? Haman walks out and he's on cloud 9. Even the queen likes me. Until now she thought the queen didn't like him. Even the queen likes me. My life is perfect. And what happens? He sees Mordechai outside, and Mordechai again doesn't bow down. And instead Mordechai is learning with the Jewish children. And so Haman right away has those Jewish children taken and put in jail. because he can, just because he can. He comes home and he's furious. Here I was at the top of my life, and now I'm being put down like this. And so his wife tells him, build a gallows. So he builds the gallows right then and there. He gets to work. He gets his whole family together, and they build the gallows. And before it's dark out, he's already finished building this 50 amos gallows. And he goes up to the top to see. He wants to see that when he hangs Mordechai, the whole Shushan is going to be able to see. So he climbs up to the top of the gallows himself. He stands on top and he looks around to see, can he see the whole Shushan from here? And he could, and he's brimming with pride. And he hears a baskel come out and he says, Haman, it's perfect. Your gallows are perfect. And he comes down and he knows that he's at the top of the world. Now nothing can bother him now. He's at the top with the king, he's top with the queen, and he just got a baskel from Shemayim telling him that his gallows are perfect. So he comes down. Meanwhile, the king can't sleep. The king is extremely nervous. The queen's been acting weird. Something really big is going on, and somebody's not telling him something. There's something going on people know about. Somebody's not telling him something. He's twisting and turning and finally drifts off to sleep. He drifts off to sleep and he has a nightmare. In his nightmare, he sees Haman standing over him with a sword, and he right away wakes up. And he's taken aback. He doesn't even remember what his dream was. He's just really afraid of it. And he tells his servants, I can't sleep. Something's wrong. There's definitely a plot against me. I need you to go. Generally, I should have servants that are going to help me. Why are my servants not telling me about this plot? Must be that I owe somebody something. That at one time I didn't take care of somebody who did something good for me. And so he says, go bring me my Divrei Hayam, go bring me my chronicles. Let's see, where did something happen where I owe somebody a favor? And so he goes to it and he sees the story with Mordechai. Sure enough, Haman is outside, and Haman is pacing back and forth outside. He wants to come in and tell the king about hanging Mordechai, but he's not sure, and things are bothering him. He is at the top. He's not at the top. He's not sure what to do. Finally, as day breaks, he comes in and he wakes up the king. He comes to the king and he tells the king. He walks into the king. The king says, "You know what? I'm not giving him a second to talk. I'm very upset at him. Something's wrong with him. I don't know what it is, but I'm not giving him a second to talk." And he says, "What should I do to somebody that I want to show that I'm grateful towards them?" And so he sets up a trap for Haman. He says, let me see, what's Haman going to tell me that I should do to the person that I want to show such gratefulness towards? And let's see what Haman says. Let's see if Haman is going to use this as a further stepping stone for him to throw me over. And sure enough, that's what Haman goes straight to. He says, take the royal garb, whatever, and take the king's horse that he rode on the day of his, not just some royal garb, take the royal garb from the day of his coronation. Take the horse from his day of coronation. And when he used the words, which is the day of his coronation, he mentions the crown, right away he sees that the king got agitated. And so he stops, he backs off, he doesn't say another word about the crown. And afterward, when Achashveirosh tells him, you know what, go ahead, take that and do all that to Mordechai. Right? He says, don't just do that to Mordechai. Sorry, one more detail that we missed out. One of the things he tells him is, and you should even give the king's daughter the king should give his princess, his daughter, to marry this special person that the king wants to show such pride towards. The king says, Zoislai, that's too far. I'm not going to give my daughter, but everything else you said, go do that to Mordechai. Which Mordechai? Right away, Haman tries squeezing at it. Here he's trying to kill Mordechai. Here he's at the top of everything, and then the king's telling him, not only not the top, but you should go do this for Mordechai. And so he starts begging the king, no, I don't want to do it. The king says, no, take my special crown that I got from this country, and take my special clothing that I got from that country, and take my special horse from here, and all these, and use my special swords, all my top accessories, and use that, give us to Mordechai and take it, and take him through the streets. The city hears about this parade that's going to happen, and they're very excited. Esther puts out an order that all businesses today be closed. Everyone should be at this parade. Meanwhile, Haman is back there, he's begging the king. He says, please, king, I don't want to do it. Why not the 10,000 kikar kesef that I said I was going to give to you? Let me give it to Mordechai instead. That's how you'll show him your desire for honoring him. And the king says, no, I don't want that. You're going to do exactly as I told you. And the king says, listen, I know you don't want to do that for Mordechai, but ultimately you're Mordechai's slave. I know that years ago you promised Mordechai that you're going to be a slave once a week. You owe it to Mordechai. And so he has to go and he has to do it, and he comes to Mordechai. Mordechai is sitting, and he's dirty from the ashes that he put on his head from when he was mourning. And so he tells Haman, I can't put on the king's clothing like this. I need to get washed up. And they look for a bathhouse. Everything's closed because Esther closed all the businesses. So he says, you have to wash me. So he washes him. And you have to cut my hair. So he cuts his hair. And while he's cutting his hair, he sighs, he moans about it, he's upset about it. And he says, what are you moaning for? We all know that you used to be a barber. Yeah, today you're a somebody, but you were once a nobody also. Get off your high horse. And this completely crushes Haman's ego. And Haman takes him through the city, and the Medrash tells us that there was a procession of 27,000 soldiers going in front of them, and behind them were all the Yidden of the city were walking behind, and it was a massive, beautiful parade, and they go through everything, and they come by Haman's house. You know the story where Haman's daughter dumped her garbage pail on Haman's head, and after that she falls out the window and she dies. This is the daughter that Haman wanted to succeed Vashti, and now she's dead, and Haman's completely broken and mourning, and he comes home and he's flustered. What am I going to do now? I have a party to go to with the king, and meanwhile it looks like everything's being turned upside down for me. And he's trying to talk to his advisors to plan a new plan. Maybe the king wants him out. Maybe he should escape, and he starts planning an escape route. And in the middle of his plans, the king's advisors king's guards come and say, Mahu Lavias Haman to the party, right? They bring Haman to the party and say, how dare you make the king wait? They come to the party, and now Esther is ready to tell that somebody wants to kill my people, right? Just somebody. Achashveirosh turns to Haman and says, who's this somebody? Who would want to kill the queen? Right? Because he still doesn't know who she is. He says, who would want to kill the queen? And Haman says, I have no idea. And so Medrash tells us that at that point Achashveirosh was such a morbid anti-Semite that as much as Esther was angry at Haman, she was angry at Achashveirosh, and she said, Ish Sarva Oyev, a terrible enemy, and she was about to point straight at the king, and the Malach came and pushed her hand to the side, and she continued saying, Haman Harashazah, and it's this Haman, and the king is shocked and flabbergasted, and he walks outside to the garden to think for a second, and when he's in the garden, Charveina comes out there and tells him, by the way, you should also know, once you know all this, you should also know that I've done some investigating, and Haman was behind the plot from Big Son and Sancherev to kill you. And the king comes in and he's furious, and Haman sees that his end is coming. And so he goes to the queen, and he starts begging the queen. What? Possibly. He goes back to the queen. He goes over to the queen. The queen was laying on a recliner, and to Esther, and he starts talking to her and begging her to say, "Oh, I didn't know you were Jewish. I wasn't against you. It was no offense." And he slips while he's there, and he falls on top of her. And so the king comes in, and he sees Haman laying on top of Esther. He says, "You're going to try to conquer the queen. Are you going to try to violate the queen even here in the palace?" And Haman says, "Oh, not only all that, but he also built a gallows to kill Mordechai. This guy that you were so happy with, that you wanted to honor so much, he built a gallows to kill him." And so the king says, "Well, let's have Haman killed." And so the king tells Mordechai, the king calls Mordechai, tells him, "Take my guards, go to Haman's house, and have Mordechai have Haman hung over there." And so they hang up Haman. I have a lot more to go through, but I'm being pressed for time over here. Just one important thing over here is that while the miracle happened on Pesach, which was right after, it was 3 days from the decree, and then right away on Pesach was the first part of the miracle where Haman falls. The Yidden were not told about it, and we're not told that Mordechai was promoted and that everything's taken care of. And as well, after Haman was killed, Esther didn't want to go to the king right away and tell the king, also annul the decree you made. She didn't want to look like an ingrate, so she waited 2 months. She gave the Yidden 2 more months of time to do tshuva, to daven. The Yidden continued fasting and doing tshuva for 2 more months, and then on Chav Gimel Sivan, which was 2 months later, she went back to the king and tells the king, "Let's annul the decree." And they had the whole back and forth, but they can't annul the decree, but the Yidden can defend themselves. And they set up for the day. The king sends out messages to all the nations saying that not only the Jews can defend them, but whoever helps the Jews defend themselves, they will find favor in my eyes. And so what ends up happening is Haman had satellites all throughout the nations of followers, people that were his people. And those people stayed strong with him, and they wanted to still kill the Yidden. That's who the Yidden ended up fighting, and the Yidden ended up killing on the day of Purim. Now, one last detail here. Shushan was a city made up of 2 parts. There was the northern part and the southern part. The northern part was the part where the king was, and the southern part was the part for the commoners. So the first day of killing, they killed 500 people. That was in the northern part. That was in the actual capital itself. But the residential area for all the commoners, that was outside there. And that's why the people in Shushan fought for 2 days. They fought 2 separate battles, and that's why Shushan has a later day of Purim. That's pretty much the end of it. A couple other details. In the year 3400, which is the year after Esther became queen, she has a baby, Dayavesh number 2, and this Dayavesh in the year 3606, Achashveirosh. What?
Did she have the baby or the?
No, she had a baby. She had a baby. Baby was a yid. And so, sure enough, this nevuah that he was the astrologer is telling him that a Jew is going to wear his crown. Sure enough, it went on to his kids. 2 years later, 2 years after the miracle of Purim, which happened in 3404, in the year 3606, Achashveirosh dies at 6 years old. Dayavesh becomes king, and the Yidden are living good in Persia. 2 years later, in the year 3408, which is exactly 70 years from the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, Dayavesh begins rebuilding the second Beis Hamikdash, and 4 years later, it's completed. Yeah.
I don't know what happened.